446 on your Pew Bible. So it's Psalm 133, page 446. How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. It is like precious oil on the head, running down upon the beard of Aaron, running down over the collar of his robes. It is like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion. For the Lord ordained his blessing life evermore. So we're fortunate to have Keith with us today, so we'll welcome him up here.
Thank you, Mike. How good and pleasant it is to be here at Sugar Creek this morning. Thank you. Connie, like Mike said, is unable to be here this morning, and she is really ticked. I hope she feels better when I get home, because I got to live with her the rest of the day. She's watching, however, and no, really disappointed she couldn't be here this morning. This is why we came out here, is to be with you folks. However, we'll be here for a couple more days yet, so if you would like to text her or contact her in any way, meet with her perhaps if she's feeling better, she would enjoy that, and that might be a possibility. So, just as an update, quickly, I'll do this during the sermon time, I guess, since some people are watching online and might tune in later. I finished radiation last month, and that was a breeze. There was nothing to it. I wish all the treatments were like that. Wish I'd started with that one instead of the other ones, but that's a different story. And now we wait to see if it did anything. And won't know for probably another 6 to 8 weeks. I guess there's a 3-month gap from when they finish radiation to when they do the kind of scan they're going to give me. So that means we might have some extra time to come out here for more than just 1 week and then go right back home again. We're hoping to have like a 3 or a 4 week span, maybe end of September, into October, when we can be here and actually pretend that we're still your pastors. That would be fun. And so we'll see what happens. In the meantime, everything's on a holding pattern like it's been for the past year. I'm getting kind of used to that. But like I told somebody this morning, I'm just going to keep living until I die. And I guess maybe all you are going to do that too. So we're all in this together, aren't we? Connie had a message that played on video a couple of weeks ago, and I had a good follow-up to that I was going to do today, and then I had a dream that changed my mind. Now, some pastors rely on their dreams for their sermons. I do not. I don't want anybody to know what my dreams are. Some of them are really weird and personal, but this one made me wake up a bit. I was in a discussion with a group of people, and it was in a church. It wasn't obviously this church from the dream, and we were discussing a subject that we couldn't agree on. We had one side here and one side here, and I'm pretty sure it was over the sexuality issue, which is front and foremost in some of our minds. And I'm trying to figure out how can we get these two sides together, and then a woman speaks up, and it's nobody I recognize, nobody from here, and she said, the important thing is, how can we still be a team? And then I woke up. And I thought, well, for once in my life, maybe this is a dream that could inform my message when I came out here. And sure enough, one of the lectionary passages for today is the Psalm 133. How good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. Can we still be a team? Can we dress in different ways on a Sunday morning and still be a team together? Can we decide which hymnal we're going to use and which one we're not going to use and still function together as a team? Can we have Hawkeye fans and Iowa State fans in the same place and still be a team? Okay, there's some things that just aren't ever going to happen. That's all there is to it. This shirt I'm wearing because my fingers don't do the buttons very well, and on this particular shirt I can just yank it off and pull it off again. My Hawkeye shirt won't do that without breaking the button. So they need to upgrade their apparel. Now this morning, I was at Parkview this morning, had the privilege of being there, got to see Anita, and I think Anita's watching. She looks good. She seemed really good this morning. Opal was there. And there was a man sitting in a wheelchair, and I wasn't sure how alert he was, but he had an Iowa Hawkeye blanket over his lap. And so I went and I pointed at that blanket. I said, this is really nice. I like that. And he didn't respond. And I said, look what I'm wearing. And I pointed to it, and he looks at it, and he goes, like that. He was more alert than I thought. So I know how to get his attention. But regardless, to be a team, can we do that with all of the diversity and all the different things that are happening in our world today? Now, when I was in grade school in Harrisonburg, Virginia, my dad was a student at Eastern Mennonite College. This was in the early 60s, and Brown versus the Board of Education had just been dealt with by the Supreme Court, and segregation was ruled illegal in the schools. Well, Virginia didn't go along with that at first. They had something called the resistance movement, and they were continuing to separate blacks and whites, particularly in the school systems. And in Harrisonburg at that time, a black family moved into the community and started coming to our school, which was the Park School, which was very near the campus of Eastern Mennonite College. In fact, it was part of the public school system, but it was opened because of all the students at the college that had grade school kids. And I knew nothing about this at the time. None of us did, but we were a part of history and didn't even know it. That particular family came to school, and the principal knew that this was kind of against the law at that time, and so he called the public school system, said, what should I do? I've got this black family here that just showed up. And they said, you need to send them home. They can't go to school where the rest of the group is. Well, he didn't quite know what to do with that, because the teachers weren't on board with that, and they said, if you want to send them home, you can, but we're not going to. And so he didn't do anything. And it turned out that nobody ever did come and usher them out and do that. So to this day, if you go on the campus at Eastern Mennonite University, as it is now, between Maplewood Dorm and the housing development that's there, there's a plaque commemorating the Park School and the arrival of the Ewell family, and how James Bender, the principal, refused to send them home. And that was the beginning of integration at that particular school system, which later was adopted throughout Virginia. There's a water fountain there that was part of the old Park School building. I drank out of that water fountain. So if you happen to see this, you can connect me with that. But that was a time of racial tension. Martin Luther King was organizing marches, and I became a baseball fan over that time. I thought the Chicago Cubs were popular here. Donnie Davison says no, it's Cardinals, St. Louis Cardinals. That's who we root for here. I didn't know that. Well, in third grade, the Cardinals were playing the Yankees in the World Series, and my friend says, are you a Cardinals fan or a Yankees fan? Well, I had no clue who either of them were. And they said, well, come on out to recess. All the Cardinals fans are going to get on one end of the teeter-totter, and all the Yankees fans are going to get on the other end, and whichever one has the most, that's the one that's going to win. It's going to tip the other ones up in the air. So we want you to join us. Well, who are you rooting for? We're rooting for the Cardinals. I've been a Cardinals fan ever since. And I'm from New York, and everybody assumes I'm a Yankees fan. Nope. But I became a voracious baseball fan, and I remember hearing about an interview that a sports writer did with a player, and the sports writer said, you got blacks and whites here on the same team. Do you think about the racial tensions between you guys when you're on the field? And the player, and I think it was the shortstop, said, no, we don't think about that. We're just trying to make the double play. Tinkers to Evers to Chance, as the double plays are often described. Don't care what color it is or who it is, we've got to make that play. Can we be a team in that way, in spite of our differences? I used the word oxymoron in the title of the message this morning. Do you know what an oxymoron is? I used to try and make a joke out of that. It's a really tiny ox that's really, really stupid. Don't think too long about that, because it isn't even that funny after you get it. But anyway, an oxymoron is two words that are opposite that are put together to form some kind of meaning using the opposite words. Bittersweet is probably the one we use the most. Jumbo shrimp, original copy, deafening silence. There's a whole bunch of oxymorons in the world. Well, I've come up with some of my own that I thought of. Rich farmer, dancing Mennonite, interesting preacher. Oh, we're on a roll now. We could do all kinds of things. How about the phrase Christian unity? Is that an oxymoron? Boy, it almost seems like it. We just can't seem to get along on much of anything sometimes with other Christians. Somebody said the term United States is an oxymoron because our states are not very united. One of my preacher friends thinks United Methodist is the best oxymoron he's ever heard. He's a Methodist preacher. But regardless, we have this psalm here that speaks to two different sides and how good it is to be together in unity. Now, it's kind of a strange psalm. It talks about precious oil on the head of Aaron running down into his beard. What in the world is that about? Well, if you would come to my house in ancient Israel, water was in short supply. Olive oil, however, was not. And you could mix olive oil with perfumes and spices, and that was what you offered guests in your house to cleanse their skin and make them feel welcome in your home. And it's also what Moses used to anoint Aaron, the first priest. And it says in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus about this, that he dumped it on his head in great quantity to indicate the great blessing of God, and the oil ran down into his beard and on his clothes, which doesn't seem very pleasant to me, but that was indicating the abundance of God's grace. By the way, the baptism that was here, we were sorry to miss that, but when we baptize by pouring a little bit of water. Well, my fingers don't work very good. It's a good thing I wasn't involved. I'd have dropped the thing and soaked both Levi and Addison as they were up here, which is all right. It's like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion. The dew on Mount Hermon was so thick that it would actually serve to water the ground and solve some of the dry, parched conditions. That's what it's like when God's people live in unity. Now, back in April, Tristan preached a message here. By the way, there's a story behind that. I don't know if you all know this. Rochelle was really hamming this up at our pastor's meeting. She said, I asked Tristan if he would preach that sermon at Zion, and he said, no, it's the day after prom. I can't preach then. Well, when did he preach here? The day after prom. Why? Because Keith and Connie asked him to do it. So Rochelle is saying, well, how do you guys rate? I'm his mother, and he doesn't respond to me, but he responds to you guys. Oh, she was having a good time with that one. And very proud of him, as well, as we all were. But I remember opening the service that day because I knew that Tristan was talking about unity, about a church in New York that I'm familiar with, that their definition of unity is when everybody is together on the same issue. And since they all agree on the issue, that issue is not going to cause any controversy in the church. And I got to thinking, well, what if you don't agree with what that issue is? Do you just pretend that you agree with it, or do you not go there? That does not sound like unity to me. And as I study unity, I am discovering that it is not what I once thought it was. It is not rallying around a cause and being unified together and having the same beliefs as the person sitting on the pew next to you. That's not unity. Unity is being able to get along with them in spite of your differences. Now, Connie's had a lot of experiences with this in her role as conference minister in New York. Finding unity over some of our issues is a little difficult. And Michael Danner is a high-ranking person in the Mennonite Church USA, and Connie attended a conference ministers gathering in San Francisco, California. And Tim Huber, who writes for Anabaptist World, asked Michael Danner, I need to talk to somebody about some of the issues that are that conference ministers are dealing with. Who should I talk to? And Michael Danner said, talk to Connie Zehr. We were pretty impressed by that. Well, I think part of the reason he suggested that is because Connie was getting slammed on both sides in New York. Can you imagine a conference minister getting pounded on both sides on a certain issue? I can't think that that would ever happen. And Connie reported to Tim Huber that both sides are behaving the same way, refusing to get along with the other side. They're using some of the same strategies in their arguments. Neither side is really very different except what they're trying not to agree on. Well, a progressive church in New York got a hold of that because Tim Huber printed it in the article, and they called Connie and said, can you explain what you mean by this? You mean to say that we're every bit as difficult as what the conservative side is? And I'm not quite sure how Connie answered that, but I know how I would have answered it. Yes, we are all being difficult sometimes, regardless of which side we're on. How can we come together on this? Are we less unified today as a church than we've ever been? It might seem like that because of social media, but I don't think so. I'm remembering some pretty serious situations, and I've talked about these two things so often that I almost hesitate to bring it up again, but I brought the book along that talks about, this was in our apartment in Iowa. Tell me what the history of Lewis County Mennonites in New York is doing in our apartment in Iowa. Well, I found it there, and there's two schisms that happened in northern New York, serious ones. The first one had to do with baptism. This was back in the early 1800s. A man from Europe by the name of Samuel Froelich believed that you had to be immersed to be baptized properly. If you weren't immersed, you had to be rebaptized. And this is how he says it. Froelich insisted that all new members must submit to rebaptism by immersion, since every other faith but ours is a dead faith. That doesn't sound very unity building to me. Every other faith is no good. Ours is the only one that counts. About 100 years later, there was another schism, and you've heard me talk about this. This had to do with the plain coat. I own a plain coat, and I was going to bring it here this morning and model it for you because I think I look pretty good in it. But I didn't because there's too many buttons. I can't do the buttons. So I'll have to do that another time. But the controversy over proper dress in a church, that's how Simon Gingrich got involved with the church in New York. I've told you that story. He became a bishop of one of the churches that was having a big problem with this. Arlene Yowzy, who wrote this book, made a very penetrating comment. She said, perhaps no other one element has had so great an impact upon dissensions, factions, rifts, and loss of church membership as did enforcement of standardization of dress. That was a point of contention, and they couldn't agree. And rather than try and unify around that, they split. And that was actually the start of a different congregation up in New York where we're from. They don't talk about that so much anymore, but I wore that plain coat once in our church at Lowville to preach a sermon. And there was a woman there who says, I could hardly look at you this morning because that coat reminds me of all of the strife that we had with each other back in the day. And she didn't say a thing about how good I looked in it. So there you go. Sometimes we have a little bit of trouble. So unity is not rallying together, becoming of the same mind to surround a cause. And I think I can defend this scripturally. One could maybe argue, and I'm willing to listen to the argument, how good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity, that kindred implies that it's a closed group that agrees on the topics. But this particular psalm, there's a question of what was going on historically when it was written. We don't know for sure if David wrote it or not, but it's thought that he might have. And there's a suggestion from Bible scholars that this is when there were different factions from different parts of the church, but they all agreed that they would make David their king. And David was thrilled by that, and that's when he wrote this psalm. So different sides came together. Or there's another theory that this was written during the time of the Assyrian invasion of the north country of Israel, and a whole bunch of refugees were coming down into Judah from there. Apparently closing the border wasn't the issue that it is today. And so they were assimilating different people into the group, and so this psalm was addressing that. A third possibility is that this is talking about during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, when the people came together and decided to rebuild the walls and discovered that there were some sacred writings in there, and they formed a unity over that. Whatever the case, there's three different possibilities, and all three talk about people that are different being unified, not kindred being of the same mind. And even if you don't agree with any of that, then you get to the book of Acts. Now, I understand that there's a Sunday school class here studying the book of Acts, right? You folks are crazy. Studying that book? That's going to upset your whole theology in a good way. Last Sunday, you discussed a question that I'm actually going to talk about now. I wish I could have sat in on that. See, when the Holy Spirit came upon the people in the room in the book of Acts, it came on everybody, both inside and outside the building. And the people there, the scribes and the Pharisees at that time couldn't understand that. In fact, they said and now I'm going to be shifting here, doing some Bible stuff. I've got to figure this out. Acts chapter 2. Verse 12, they say to each other, all were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, what does this mean? How can this be? People that are not of the same background we are seem to be having the same gifts of the Spirit. And that's when Peter stood up and gave his famous message in Acts chapter 2, one of the most famous sermons in the Bible. In the last days it will be that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams. That's why I had that dream. Old men are dreaming dreams now. The rite of circumcision was pretty serious. Genesis chapter 17, verse 10 talks point blank about this. God says, this is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and every offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. There it is. Plain as day. You know, sometimes as Christians we love to do proof texting and point to a certain verse. This verse says this, and that's why I believe this. And this is what the Orthodox Jews at the time would point to. It was a very clear command. Verse 14, God says, any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. There it is, plain as day. Well, in the book of Acts, the Spirit was falling on everybody, circumcised and uncircumcised. By the way, maybe I should just keep my mouth shut about this, but I have to wonder, why did God choose circumcision to be a mark of the people? And who was checking at the door to make sure? I don't want to know the answer to some of these questions. I will say this, that if you want to get a man's attention, that's one part of the body that will perk them up right away. So maybe God knew what he was doing. But anyway, this was a problem, and in Acts chapter 15, we start to see this in verses 1 and 5. Certain individuals came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you're circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you can't be saved. That was a pretty strong statement. I think this is what you studied last Sunday in your Sunday school class, right? I should have one of you give this sermon. Moving on to verse 5, why did I write that one? Oh, okay. The Pharisees stood up and said, it is necessary for them to be circumcised in order to keep the law of Moses. And so they started to have an argument about this. Interestingly enough, Peter, the Apostle Peter, in the book of Acts, appears to be defending the way the Spirit came down on all people, but Luke wrote the book of Acts. Paul wrote the book of Galatians, and in Galatians you get a little bit different story. Apparently Peter was wavering. Peter was a fisherman, maybe not that educated. Here's these educated people pointing to Scripture and saying it's plain as day, you got to do that. And apparently Peter was thinking, yeah, maybe we should consider that. And Paul says this, when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood self-condemned. For until certain people came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But after they came, he drew back and kept himself separate for fear of the circumcision faction. So even Paul and Peter were having a little bit of a disagreement over this. Paul made no bones about it. In chapter 5, verse 6, and again, here we go, I got it. In chapter 5, verse 6, for in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything. The only thing that counts is faith working through love. That was a controversial statement. It seemed to conflict with what was in the Old Testament. But it was part of the defense of people from different sides experiencing the indiscriminate and the inclusiveness of the power of the Holy Spirit. So that's why I say that unity is maybe two sides that don't necessarily agree, but they can still function together. Now, I don't know if I got myself in trouble or not. At the Lewis County Fair, it's a long parade on parade nights, about 2 hours long, and they come up through the center of town, and then they go out to the fairgrounds, and they walk in front of the grandstand, and I announce the parade to the people in the grandstand, and I say who the groups are, and they give me a script to read. Well, some of them get a little political, and they start taking sides, and I tend just to skip that part, and maybe I should have kept my mouth shut this time. But there was a church marching through, and they said, and they wanted this read, we are a King James Bible-believing church. And then I said, I met King James once. He's a musician. And that's true. There is a musician by the name of King James. See, the parade was getting long, and it was hot, and I was starting to say things that I probably shouldn't have said. But nobody said anything until the next day I met a pretty conservative person at the fair, and he said he laughed when he heard that. And then he said, I thought you were going to talk about LeBron James, the basketball player. I said, well, I hadn't thought of that. I probably would have if I'd have thought of that. The idea that it has to be this way or it's not valid, that does not bring unity. By the way, for whatever it's worth, I think one of the best versions of the Bible is the one in your pew right there, the New Revised Standard, which, by the way, is being discontinued. There is now an updated edition that's going to be coming out with Bible scholarship is something that's constantly evolving. We're discovering new things all the time, and I'm told there's as many as 20,000 minor changes to update this particular version. When it comes to baptism, there was a lady who came to see me, a little bit on the younger side, probably in her 30s. That's younger to me, by the way. Some of you might think that's kind of old. Nah. She wanted to be baptized, but she didn't want to be baptized in her church because, first of all, she didn't want to be immersed. She just had a fear of water. And her father was pretty adamant that that's the only way you're going to be baptized. If you get baptized any other way, I'm not coming. And she said, he doesn't need to come, but would you baptize me on the grounds of the Maple Ridge Center, up on that little gazebo up on the hill? I'd like it to happen there. And I talked with her for a while, and I heard her testimony and what she was thinking, and we ended up having a very nice baptismal service, just a little bit of water on top of her head. My fingers worked a little better back then. She, after that baptism, I'm told that she went all through town telling everybody what a wonderful baptism she had and how this faith of hers was just so real and so important. You see, there are things we can do that are meaningful, and we don't have to stand arguing over certain things, because apparently in the New Testament it didn't matter what side you were on, you got the Holy Spirit anyway, which is pretty amazing. when you think about it. So I'm going to close this morning. I was really blessed by your elder selection. Both Bryce and Michael I've known as team players, and you seem to be able as a congregation to make good choices with your nominations, and you nominated 2 team players, and that was the right thing to do, I think. And we have a team player that's going to be joining us now, and I've been very impressed with the way that the elders work together as a team, and the way we've been able to deal with things, and the way that we can honestly consider the differences we have of an opinion, but can we still be together here in the congregation? Can we still be a team, regardless of what shirt we wear to church on a Sunday morning?